Have you ever felt like you pray, seek, learn, but simply don't move forward? Like something is holding back your spiritual growth even though you're doing everything right? What if the problem isn't a lack of effort or knowledge, but something far more subtle, quiet, and difficult to detect? Today we're going to talk about a kind of pride that doesn't shout, doesn't show off, doesn't look like arrogance, yet blocks your growth before God. Maybe you've been stuck for months. Maybe you keep repeating the same mistakes. Maybe you resist advice even while saying you want to grow. Maybe you see yourself as mature, but deep down, you sense you're not being transformed the way you should be. What if there's an area of your life where you believe you're right, but aren't willing to be corrected? This video will reveal how hidden pride disguises itself as confidence, strong opinion, and even spiritual conviction. If you stay until the end, you'll learn how to identify invisible signs that may be limiting your progress, understand why God resists pride, even when it's sophisticated, and discover how to develop practical humility that unlocks real growth. The question is simple: do you truly want to grow, or do you just want to keep being right? Before we move forward, just a brief and important transition. This video was created with the help of artificial intelligence tools used to organize ideas, structure the content, and deepen the biblical analysis. But the reflection, the responsibility, and the invitation to transformation are fully directed to you, someone who desires to grow consciously and maturely in your faith. When growth stops, it is rarely by accident. There is always something internal operating quietly. You may continue praying, studying, consuming Christian content, participating in spiritual activities, and still remain at the same level. The feeling is constant effort, but minimal progress. And often, the issue is not lack of dedication. It is a distorted perception you haven't yet recognized. Proverbs 12:15 says, "The way of a fool seems right to him, but a wise man listens to advice." Notice the first part carefully, seems right to him. The danger is not doing something you know is wrong. The danger is being certain that you are right. Hidden pride begins exactly there, in an internal conviction that does not allow revision. Have you noticed how easy it is to explain your behavior, justify your decisions, and defend your positions? Maybe you listen to advice, but you're already preparing your response before the other person finishes speaking. Maybe you even accept suggestions, but rarely change direction. That doesn't sound like rebellion. It sounds like confidence, but it may be disguised rigidity. Invisible pride does not show up as open superiority. It appears as excessive confidence in your own perception. You begin to believe you understand enough, that you already know how things work, that your interpretation of the situation is the most balanced one, and little by little, your ability to remain teachable starts to diminish, without you even noticing. Spiritual stagnation almost always begins when listening decreases, when you spend more time explaining than learning, when your opinions become more important than your transformation, and most dangerous of all, you still believe you are growing because you remain active. But activity is not the same as maturity. There is a deep difference between healthy conviction and unquestionable certainty. Conviction allows dialogue, adjustment, and development. Rigid certainty builds internal barriers, and every internal barrier limits how much grace can work within you. Because growth requires constant openness. Ask yourself honestly, when was the last time you changed your mind after being confronted? When was the last time you quickly acknowledged a mistake without needing to justify your intention? When was the last time you listened all the way through with a genuine desire to learn? The text says, "The wise listen to counsel." It does not say the wise know more. It does not say the wise are always right. It says they listen. A teachable posture is what separates those who keep advancing from those who begin repeating cycles. And maybe the blockage you feel is not in your circumstances, but in your silent resistance to adjustment. Hidden pride does not shout. It does not present itself as obvious sin. It settles in as excessive stability, as an internal structure that says, "I already understand." And the moment you believe you fully understand, you close doors that still needed to remain open. True growth requires constant review. It requires the willingness to admit that your perception may be incomplete. It requires accepting that you can still learn, even after years of walking in faith. As long as you remain open to correction, the process keeps flowing. But when defensiveness begins, Progress slows. Maybe the first step to unlocking your growth is not doing more, but listening more. Not speaking better, but hearing better. Because the moment you stop being teachable may be the exact moment your growth begins to stall. And that leads us to a deeper question about when this internal shift actually started. There is a nearly imperceptible moment in the spiritual journey when you stop seeing yourself as a learner and begin seeing yourself as a reference. It is not declared. It is not a conscious decision. But gradually, you begin to trust your experience more than the possibility that you could still be wrong. And that is a delicate point, because stagnation begins when stability turns into silent self-sufficiency. In Revelation 3:17, Jesus confronts a church that said, "I am rich, I have prospered, and I need nothing." The tone was not arrogant, it was confident, convinced. They believed they were well. The problem was that their perception did not match their spiritual reality. They were blind, but did not know they were blind. And that is the most sophisticated form of pride, believing you have already reached a sufficient level. You may not say out loud that you need nothing, but you may act that way. When you consume content only to confirm what you already think. When you hear a message and filter only what reinforces your perspective. When correction comes, but you immediately find arguments to neutralize it. That doesn't look like rebellion. It looks like maturity, but it may be resistance. Sophisticated pride is not scandalous. It manifests as excessive stability. You maintain your spiritual routine, your discipline, your knowledge, but you lose vulnerability. And growth requires constant vulnerability. Without it, you only accumulate information, without allowing it to transform you. There is a difference between being firm and being closed. Firmness is conviction grounded in truth. Being closed is the inability to revise. And when you close yourself, even without realizing it, you build an internal barrier against adjustment. From that point forward, your faith becomes more defensive than expansive. Ask sincerely, when was the last time someone pointed out something in you that needed to change, and you truly considered it? Not just heard it, not just responded with explanations, but paused, reflected, and adjusted. Spiritual maturity is not measured by how much you know, but by how much you are still willing to learn. The church in Revelation believed it was strong, but Jesus revealed invisible lack. That teaches us something profound. Internal security is not proof of growth. You can feel stable and still be stagnant. You can feel mature and still have untouchable areas. The day you stop being teachable is not marked by a dramatic fall. It is marked by accumulated small resistances. Small moments when you defend your image instead of reviewing your posture. Small instances when you choose to be right rather than to grow. The problem is that this posture becomes a habit, and when the habit settles, growth slows. You keep doing, keep speaking, keep learning, but internally, you do not allow yourself to be shaped. And without shaping, there is no real advancement. Jesus did not confront that church to condemn it, but to awaken it. Confrontation is opportunity. Correction is care. But it only works where there is openness. Without openness, even grace encounters resistance. Maybe you are wondering whether this truly applies to you. And that question is already a good sign. Because hidden pride prefers to declare that everything is fine. Humility, on the other hand, begins by questioning itself. And that healthy self-questioning may be the beginning of your breakthrough. If this reflection is resonating with you, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Here we talk about spiritual growth with depth and responsibility, without superficiality and without condemnation, always pursuing real maturity in faith. But there is still a deeper dimension to this subject, because sometimes it is not only you who resists, sometimes it is God who resists. And understanding that changes completely how you interpret your moments of stagnation. There comes a moment when you intensify your pursuit. You pray with more discipline, read with greater focus, try to adjust your habits, and still feel as if something is blocked. The feeling is not total abandonment but interrupted progress, as if there were an invisible resistance you cannot explain. And almost always the automatic interpretation is external. Difficult circumstances, complicated people, spiritual opposition. Rarely does the first suspicion fall on your own internal posture. James 4:6 declares something deeply uncomfortable. God resists the proud but gives grace to the humble. That statement completely shifts the perspective. The text does not say that God simply lets the proud walk alone. It says he resists. That implies active opposition. It is not absence. It is confrontation. And this forces us to consider a mature possibility. At times, the resistance we feel may be a loving confrontation coming from God himself. But why would God resist someone who prays, seeks, and genuinely appears to want growth? Because spiritual growth is not only about practice. It is about posture. You can practice correct disciplines with a closed heart. You can ask for direction while keeping certain areas untouchable. You can pursue advancement while protecting convictions that are never examined. And when the heart is rigidly structured, grace does not find space to operate fully. Understand something important. This resistance is not punishment. It is protection. God does not cooperate with postures that prevent maturity. If he strengthened someone who insists on remaining inflexible, he would be reinforcing a pattern that could lead to future collapse. In that sense, divine resistance is a preventive break. It is care. It is a healthy boundary. It is adjustment before rupture. Perhaps you are asking for more opportunities, more influence, more growth. Yet internally, you still react defensively when confronted. Perhaps you desire deeper spirituality but avoid situations that expose your vulnerabilities. Grace flows in environments of openness. Where there is humility, there is space. Where there is rigidity, there is blockage. There is also a subtle difference between grounded conviction and inflexible identity. Grounded conviction is firm, yet revisable in light of truth. Inflexible identity fuses itself with personal opinion. When someone questions your posture, you feel attacked as a person, not corrected as a disciple. And that fusion between identity and opinion becomes fertile ground for hidden pride. Ask yourself maturely, are you truly seeking transformation or merely confirmation? Do you ask for direction while already deciding what you are willing to hear? Do you desire growth, but only within limits that do not challenge your comfort zone? These questions are not accusations. They reveal. And revelation is always the first step toward realignment. When understood correctly, divine resistance is not rejection. It is invitation. It is God saying, I want to take you further, but I cannot ignore this internal structure. As long as that structure remains, progress will be partial. Not because love is lacking, but because spiritual coherence demands alignment. God does not expand what first needs adjustment. This does not mean that every delay is caused by pride, nor that every challenge is the result of rigidity. Life is complex, but the principle remains. Humility attracts grace, and grace is the environment where deep transformation happens. Without grace, there is effort. With grace, there is consistent progress. Perhaps what you interpreted as silence is actually pedagogical resistance. Perhaps what you called stagnation is a strategic point of review. And if you have the courage to examine it honestly, you may discover that the blockage is not external. It is in the posture that has not yet been surrendered. If this reflection is expanding your vision and bringing clarity to areas that once seemed confusing, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Here we approach spiritual growth with seriousness, depth, and responsibility, always pursuing real and practical transformation, without superficiality and without condemnation. But to fully understand how this dynamic works, we need to look at someone who had passion, courage, and conviction, and still fell because of unexamined confidence. This is where the next part becomes essential. Peter is one of the most human and transparent figures in Scripture. He was not indifferent, distant, or apathetic. He was intense, loyal, courageous. When he spoke with conviction. When he made promises, he made them passionately. And that is precisely why his story is so important in this context. Hidden pride rarely manifests only in cold or arrogant people. Often it appears in sincere, committed, and seemingly mature believers. In Luke 22:33-34, Peter firmly declares that he is ready to go with Jesus to prison and even to death. The statement sounds heroic. It seems like the ultimate expression of loyalty. But Jesus responds with a sobering prediction. Before the rooster crows, Peter will deny him 3 times. The contrast is striking. On one side, absolute confidence. On the other, vulnerability, invisible to Peter himself. Peter was not pretending. He truly believed what he was saying. And that is the central point. Hidden pride does not begin as conscious hypocrisy. It begins as an overestimation of your own stability. It begins when you believe you have moved beyond certain weaknesses, when you say internally, "I would never fall into that." And without realizing it, you turn that area into a blind spot. There is something dangerous about definitive statements concerning yourself. When you declare you would never fail in a certain way, you may be ignoring circumstances you have not yet faced. You may be underestimating future pressures. Confidence is necessary, but confidence without self-knowledge becomes silent imprudence, and silent imprudence prepares the ground for failure. Perhaps you do not make dramatic promises like Peter did, but you may think you have mastered certain impulses. You may believe certain temptations no longer apply to you. You may feel overly secure in areas that are no longer examined deeply. And that is exactly where pride begins to operate in a sophisticated way. Peter fell not because he lacked love, but because he had excessive confidence in himself. He loved Jesus. He was close to Jesus. But proximity does not replace ongoing humility. Intimacy does not eliminate the need for internal vigilance. The area where you say, "This is no longer an issue for me," may be precisely the area that has stopped being monitored carefully. There is another important detail. Peter did not simply accept Jesus' warning. He insisted. He reaffirmed his own perception. That insistence reveals something profound about hidden pride. It is not merely having confidence. It is resisting the possibility of being wrong. It is preferring to sustain your image of strength rather than consider your real vulnerability. Peter's fall did not begin at the moment of denial. It began earlier, in inflated self-perception. The external failure was the consequence of an internal miscalculation, and this is crucial for you to understand. Many visible falls are preceded by invisible certainties that were never questioned. When Peter realizes what has happened, he weeps bitterly. His tears represent awareness, the breaking of illusion about himself. It is painful to discover you were not as strong as you believed, but that pain is also liberating. From that point forward, Peter walks with greater dependence and less self-sufficiency. Perhaps there is an area in your life marked by excessive confidence, a posture you never revisit because you believe you have already conquered it, a pattern you consider resolved, though it simply has not been tested recently. The mature question is not, "Am I strong?" The mature question is, "Where might I be overestimating myself?" True spiritual growth is not proving that you cannot fall. It is recognizing that without vigilance and dependence, any area can become vulnerable. Humility does not weaken your identity. It protects your journey. The more aware you are of your limitations, the more stable you become in the long run. Peter only reached full maturity after his self-confidence was broken. Restoration came with depth, and perhaps your advancement also depends on revisiting areas where you are overly certain. Because hidden pride does not always reveal itself in explicit arrogance. Often it reveals itself in conviction that refuses to acknowledge limits. And there is still an even more common, daily, and observable sign of invisible pride. It does not appear in dramatic promises, but in small everyday reactions that reveal what is truly happening inside you. Most of the time, hidden pride does not show up in dramatic declarations or exaggerated promises. It appears in something much simpler and more ordinary, the way you react when you are corrected. Small situations reveal large internal structures. A comment, a suggestion, an observation, and your automatic response already exposes what is happening inside. Proverbs 16:18 states, "Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall." The fall does not begin with a visible mistake. It begins with posture. Before any external consequence, there is an internal attitude that has already been established. And often, that attitude reveals itself in immediate defensiveness when confronted. Have you noticed how, when someone points something out in you, your first reaction may be to explain, not to reflect, not to weigh it carefully, but to justify? Explaining is not necessarily wrong. The problem is when it becomes automatic. When you feel the need to protect your image before even considering whether the observation might have merit. Hidden pride creates a constant self-protection mechanism. It turns correction into threat. It interprets adjustment as attack. And little by little, you begin to close yourself off, not because you want to remain wrong, but because you want to preserve the feeling of being right. And that preservation comes at the cost of growth. Another clear sign is the difficulty of admitting mistakes quickly. You may acknowledge them later. You may reflect on them privately. But in the moment of confrontation, you resist. You argue. You provide context. You point to circumstances. Everything to soften your responsibility. And the more this posture repeats, the more the heart hardens without you noticing. There is also the tendency to evaluate the other person's intention instead of examining the content of what was said. You begin to think, but he makes mistakes too. She doesn't understand my situation. And while you focus on the messenger, the opportunity for learning is lost. Pride shifts the focus from the message to the person delivering it. Notice that none of this looks like explicit arrogance. It appears to be legitimate defense. It seems like healthy self-protection. But when that defense becomes a pattern, it builds an invisible wall around your growth. Because no one grows while constantly defending themselves. The fall described in Proverbs is not only a public collapse, it is also the fall of potential. It is the weakening of your ability to advance. Every small accumulated resistance reduces your spiritual flexibility. Every automatic justification decreases your sensitivity to correction. Maybe you're asking yourself, do I really do this? The best way to know is to observe your recent reactions. How did you respond the last time someone pointed something out in you? Was there pause and consideration, or immediate reaction and explanation? The speed of your response may reveal the structure of your heart. Practical humility does not mean accepting every criticism without discernment. It means, first of all, taking it seriously. It means creating internal space before responding. It means allowing the possibility of being wrong to be real. That pause is powerful. It prevents pride from taking automatic control. Pride protects your image. Humility protects your future. Pride seeks to maintain external coherence. Humility seeks internal growth. And every time you choose to listen before justifying, something inside you expands. Something becomes more flexible, more teachable, more prepared to mature. Perhaps the blockage you feel is not in major decisions, but in small reactions repeated over time. And if you begin to pay attention to these micro moments, you will realize that hidden pride does not need to be dramatic to be limiting. It operates in details. But recognizing the pattern is only half the process. There is a specific prayer that can expose what you still cannot see on your own. And that is the prayer we need to talk about now. There is a prayer that many repeat, but few truly desire to experience deeply. It is not emotionally comfortable. It does not reinforce your sense of stability. It does not confirm your perception of yourself. On the contrary, it challenges you. And perhaps that is why it is one of the least lived prayers with radical sincerity. In Psalm 139:23-24, David declares, "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any wicked way in me and lead me in the everlasting way." This is not a generic prayer. It is an invitation to divine investigation. It is surrendering your own diagnosis and allowing God to reveal what you have not yet been able to see on your own. Notice that David does not ask only for direction. He asks for examination. He acknowledges that something misaligned may exist within him that has not yet been identified. That posture already demonstrates practical humility, because hidden pride prefers to believe it already knows itself fully. It trusts its own internal evaluation too much. This prayer requires emotional and spiritual maturity. It requires willingness to confront inconsistencies. It requires courage to face answers that may contradict your self-image. When you ask God to search your heart, you must be prepared to recognize defensive attitudes, mixed motives, partially selfish intentions. Perhaps you often pray for growth, open doors, greater opportunities, but you rarely pray for your motives to be exposed. Growth is attractive. Examination is not always. Because examination reveals areas where you still react with pride, resistance, or the need for control. Ask honestly, when was the last time you asked God to show you something wrong in you and truly paid attention to the answer? Do you listen to learn, or do you listen to respond? Do you change when confronted or simply adjust your language to maintain the appearance of maturity? Hidden pride thrives in lack of awareness. While it remains invisible, it operates freely. It shapes your reactions, influences your decisions, and limits your openness without you realizing it. But when something is brought into the light, its power decreases. Light does not only reveal, it weakens what was hidden. That is why David's prayer is so strategic. He understands that his own vision may be compromised. He recognizes that the human heart can deceive itself, and instead of trusting only his perception, he submits his self-evaluation to God's perspective. This posture also transforms your relationship with external correction. When you are already asking God to examine you, correction from others stops being a threat and becomes reinforcement. Your identity is no longer grounded in appearing right. It becomes grounded in being shaped. There is a deep difference between seeking validation and seeking transformation. Those who seek validation want constant confirmation that they are on the right path. Those who seek transformation accept temporary discomfort to achieve lasting maturity. David's prayer reveals someone who chooses transformation over self-preservation. Perhaps your stagnation is not connected to lack of information, but to the absence of sincere examination. Perhaps God has already used circumstances, conversations, even confrontations to reveal something, but you interpreted them as exaggeration or misunderstanding. The right prayer repositions your posture. It replaces defense with openness. When you say, "Search me," you are declaring something powerful. I accept the possibility that I may be wrong about myself. That declaration breaks silent self-sufficiency. It creates internal space. And where there is space, grace finds room to work deeply. But recognizing the need for examination is only the beginning. True humility is not a single moment of prayer. It is a continuous strategy for growth. And that is exactly the practical strategy we must understand if your progress is going to be sustainable rather than temporary. Humility is not a personality trait. It is a growth strategy. Many times you associate humility with weakness, passivity, or insecurity. But biblically, it is positioning. It is the conscious decision to remain teachable, adjustable, and open, even when you already have experience and knowledge. In Philippians 2:3-5, we are instructed to do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but to consider others above ourselves, having the same mindset that was in Christ Jesus. This instruction is not about inferiority. It is about posture. It is about choosing a mentality that prioritizes growth over self-preservation. Having the mind of Christ does not mean having all the answers. It means keeping your heart aligned. It means not clinging to your position as if it defines your identity. When you understand this, you stop seeing correction as a threat and begin seeing it as a tool for maturity. Practical humility shows itself in simple attitudes. You ask questions before making statements. You listen fully before concluding. You admit quickly when you realize you were wrong. You do not need to win arguments in order to feel secure. Your security comes from knowing you are in a constant process of transformation. Pride wants to preserve image. Humility wants to preserve progress. Pride fights to be right. Humility fights to grow. And when that internal shift happens, something begins to accelerate. Because God cooperates with those who remain correctable. There is a consistent spiritual principle. The more flexible the heart, the more sustainable the growth. Rigidity creates limits. Flexibility creates expansion. This does not mean relativizing truth. It means recognizing that your understanding can continue to mature. Perhaps you have been seeking advancement for a long time. Perhaps you desire new levels of maturity, new opportunities, deeper spirituality. But advancement does not begin with more external effort. It begins with internal posture, with the decision to prefer learning over defending. Humility does not diminish your spiritual authority. On the contrary, it strengthens it. Truly mature people do not need to prove their maturity. They demonstrate it through openness. They do not fear revision. They are not threatened by honest questioning. When you choose humility as a daily practice, your growth stops being unstable. You no longer depend on intense emotional moments to move forward. You advance because you remain teachable. And those who remain teachable never stop growing. If this content is helping you recognize areas that need adjustment and awakening a genuine desire for maturity, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Here our focus is practical transformation, solid growth, and faith applied with responsibility. In the end, the question that opened this video returns with greater strength. Do you want to grow, or do you want to keep being right? The breakthrough begins the moment you decide that growth is more important than self-preservation. And that decision can be made right now. Throughout this video, we did not talk about obvious arrogance. We did not talk about blatant superiority or open contempt for others. We talked about something far more sophisticated, a kind of pride that disguises itself as conviction, experience, stability, and even spiritual zeal. A pride that does not shout or impose itself, yet creates silent resistance to growth. You have seen that spiritual stagnation is rarely about lack of effort. Often it is about posture. We saw that the path can seem right in your own eyes even when it needs adjustment, that it is possible to be active in faith yet internally closed, that God resists pride not out of rejection, but out of alignment with the process of maturity, and that even someone like Peter, sincere and passionate, fell because he overestimated his own stability. We also identified everyday signs of hidden pride, immediate defensiveness, the need to explain before reflecting, the difficulty of admitting mistakes quickly, the tendency to protect image instead of protecting growth. Small reactions that accumulated over time build invisible barriers. The prayer, "Search me," proved to be a powerful key, because when you ask for examination, you break silent self-sufficiency. When you accept the possibility of being wrong, you open space for grace to act. And when you choose humility as a daily practice, growth stops being unstable and becomes consistent. Now everything converges into an internal decision. Not a temporary emotional decision, but a strategic choice. You can continue accumulating information, consuming content and keeping your structure intact, or you can allow your structure to be reviewed. You can keep defending your perception, or you can choose to mature beyond it. Humility does not diminish you. It strengthens your trajectory. It does not erase your identity. It purifies it. It does not weaken your conviction. It aligns it. When you prefer growth over being right, something profound happens. Your faith stops being merely externally consistent and becomes internally flexible. Perhaps the blockage you felt at the beginning of this video now has a name. Perhaps you have identified areas where you were overly secure. Perhaps you noticed reactions that reveal resistance. And this is not a reason for guilt. It is a reason for advancement. Because what is recognized can be adjusted. Spiritual growth is not automatic. It responds to posture. It accelerates in the presence of humility. It sustains itself when the heart remains teachable. And the moment you decide to review yourself is the moment the next level becomes possible. If this message brought clarity, continue this journey with us. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here we approach spiritual growth with responsibility, depth, and practical application, always seeking real transformation, not just temporary inspiration. And before closing, let this question echo honestly within you. Do you want to preserve your rightness? Or do you want to unlock your growth? Because the next level of your maturity does not depend on more external effort. It depends on the quiet decision you make right now, within your heart.